Hi, this is Mehdi,
Hey, this is Fran.
and welcome back to Total Tactics Football. Fran, what is this episode about?
Yeah, so I mean, as we round off 2020 and we welcome the new year of 2021, despite all the horrible stuff that happened this year, I think we still had wonderful things in 2020 that occurred in terms of football, both in terms of narratives around teams, around managers, and around players. And so we want to cover the kind of best stories of the 1920 season that happened in 2020, and then also what we've seen so far from 2021, this footballing season that has seen a lot of change as well in the Premier League, for example, and once again more rising stars.
No, I mean, it has been stories with a lot of ups and downs, and something that's brought us a lot of joy and sadness for a lot of people. I'd like to start with Atalanta. I think their story is a really admiring one. I mean, they move in the Champions League and the way they finished in Serie A. Fran, how impressed were you with this side? And who do you think was the key for pushing this team where they got to?
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to the manager with Gasperini playing that kind of three at the back system where he really dynamically changed a lot of the players in his team, kind of moving them into wing back positions, and playing a very like high intensity, high pressing style of football that I think overwhelmed a lot of teams. From a kind of statistical point of view, it's similar to the way that you can see Leeds performing as well. Obviously, from the three back structure, they were able to make use of very specific players, I think, up top, and they're kind of key attacking talents, either in Muriel, for example, being used as an impact substitute, having Zapata there with very, very good hold up play, playing kind of similarly in the Ilicic mold. I think early on in the year, you saw in the 1920 season that Ilicic was performing, probably his best kind of performance in football despite his age. And obviously, there's the usual age-old joke where most strikers come into form in their kind of late 30s when they're in Serie A, but that's exactly what happened for Atalanta. And beneath that all, it was kind of the underpinning of the system was having a false, this kind of 10 in Papu Gomez and having him show his talents as well. Also, at a late age, his ability to kind of score these finesses and to be given open space, whereas the team would build around him and press around him and feed him the ball so that he can unlock either the striker or go for a long shot, was key to the system. And their kind of fantastic run in Champions League, which was cut short by PSG.
You're right. I mean, this team scored 98 goals in the league, and it all came down to the way they played. Like you mentioned, they heavily involved in taking shots in those dangerous spots. You could say they made it overperform with their XG, like it was 81.9, but it's the fact that these players would constantly get into those pocket of spaces, and they would wait for the deflection every time an Atalanta player would take a shot. They would have three or four players in those positions waiting for either a rebound or hoping their player scores. And you can see that with like the likes of Zapata getting 19 goals, Muriel gets another 19 goals. It's just there were goals covered everywhere, and it wasn't reliant on one striker or two strikers to perform. It was just the team would all work together and get at the end of those chances. And I think that's the sort of style that attracts a lot of people. When you're watching as a neutral, you're excited because most footballers who people want to watch it, they love goals in the game. And I feel like Atalanta was just this perfect side last season and continuing on this year to be as an entertaining side. And I feel like that's one of the reasons why, for me, I was so impressed by them. Like a team that probably doesn't have the greatest of histories compared to the rest in Serie A, but they have sort of like stamped their name down there, and it doesn't look like it just relies on the few players. It's more the system, something that even if they lose those players, they could continue to keep.
Yeah, I think it kind of reminds me of an early Atletico Madrid under Diego Simeone. Obviously, the philosophy is much more attacking, but it's more about really molding these players that you can pick up and kind of turning them into top talents. And we've seen a lot of Atalanta players come and go, as you mentioned, and they've done extremely well. And it shows, what happens when you have a well-run kind of hierarchy under a manager and how a club can transform. And similarly, I think you could say that kind of transformation happened over in the Spanish league in the 1920 season, where Lopetegui, after being sacked from Real Madrid and all that kind of World Cup debacle, arrived at Sevilla and was able to transform the club alongside a few key buys, such as Kunde and Diego Carlos in that season, as well as the loan of Suso. and they played a very kind of static 4-2-3 style under Lopetegui, but managed to find a lot of success.
You're right. I mean, and it's a great story seeing him lift that Europa League, and they beat Manchester United and Inter Milan on their way. It was a heartfelt moment in 2020, a year as we know filled with not the best of things, a lot of negativity. But I want to give credit to how he sort of got that sort of structure and how Banega and Fernando in that midfield were key. Banega, as we know, is very industrious, a player who will put in the hard work. He gives your team extra legs in the back, but yet at the same time has the ability to unleash with a long ball or a through ball to unleash his wingers. And we saw with Suso and Ocampos, he was just able to use the width well and use that target man in like El Nesri or Luke de Jong to sort of hold the ball, bring in the wingers in, and just play a style that's a bit more classical, you would say. A lot of teams don't play with those traditional number nines at the moment, but it worked really well for Lopetegui. I was quite impressed with that sort of defensive partnership that you mentioned. Do you think that this is something that they've got now for the future that's going to build on? It's something Lopetegui is very happy with in Kunde and Diego Carlos?
No, absolutely. I think they're clearly, a top tier centre back duo. Obviously, it remains to be seen whether they'll be leaving to join perhaps slightly more industrious clubs in terms of the ability to spend money. But I think what Sevilla showed was, with Reguilon and Navas actually, putting Navas into that right wing back position really kind of took a lot um, from the best parts of Navas's game as a winger, to be honest, his ability to offer work rate. But his transformation as a player in terms of being able to actually cross and develop chances was really what shocked me last season. And I think what I liked about the wing play was that under that kind of bedrock of defense with Diego Carlos and Kunde, this and also Fernando as well, because basically he really installed Fernando as almost like a third centre back, and he would screen um, the wing backs in a sense and allow them to go forwards and create overlaps. What I liked is the kind of asymmetric use of the wingers in the system. Suso is more of a deep lying winger. He likes to cross from deep, whereas Ocampos is almost like a traditional, flexible kind of center forward archetype and also winger archetype. The weird thing about Ocampos is that he's very, very technically skilled. And you can see that in the, for example, recent Bayern Munich game when they played in the Super Cup. You could see that in the Man United game, he was causing a lot of chances on his own simply because of his ability to dribble two players. And that's the opposite in a sense of Suso. Suso can kind of dribble away and then cross from deep, and Navas would provide the overlap. Whereas Reguilon would be a little bit more direct, and Ocampos would also sometimes drift into a striker position, and then Sevilla would almost defend as a 4-4-2, and they would break apart defenses by kind of countering with Ocampos as your second striker. And I think Lopetegui's understanding of how to use key players for me is his best aspect as a coach. And I think it reminds me as well how well he utilized Isco, for example, in that kind of Spanish system, before it all came tumbling down in the World Cup. And obviously he's not a part of that kind of mess, but it shows me that, yeah, his ability to actually use the best of players' qualities is his best asset as a manager.
No, I mean for me it's great, and for me one of the most highlighting moments of 2020 was Leeds' comeback to the Premier League after a 16-year absence. Marcelo Bielsa brought the Leeds side back to the promised land after a long wait, and in a very convincing way. They were able to top the league with 10 points, and they had 93 in total. But Fran, tell me how integral was Leeds' style of play to them coming back? But like as well, we've mentioned, we've heard a lot of comments where they say like they Leeds side can, or Bielsa side can essentially run out of gas at times. Sometimes they're not able to maintain that sort of intensity. But last year, Leeds did do that. They were able to stay on top for a while and were able to come back.
So I think one thing to kind of contextualize this is, when Bielsa came into the club, Leeds were not a club that was going to vie for promotion. They were, I would say, a middling kind of championship side, and one that didn't really have kind of dreams, in terms of finding themselves within the Premier League, because they just didn't have the kind of sort of backing financially as well. So from the squad, from that kind of point of view, you'd probably think they were a club that would not be Premier League level quality. And what obviously Bielsa brings to a club is a philosophy, and it's really up to the players and the kind of bureaucracy behind to see whether they actually back him. And the fantastic kind of thing is that, a manager like Bielsa is so loved today, and that's because the club decided to back him, and they were kind of rewarded for it in a sense, trusting in his philosophy. And when it comes down to it, I think, yeah, you see them play football in the Premier League now. You see that they're a very, very intense side in terms of just playing nonstop, sticking kind of to their morals and their structure of football, and not kind of adjusting, I would say, and tinkering to opposition players. So for me, I still think we've come to an age in football where I think football training or physical training even isn't too far apart when you go club to club. I think it's perhaps a slightly overblown narrative that, Leeds are a club that would work themselves to the ground, and all the other clubs will stay kind of rested. I think, in a sense, the championship is almost too demanding a schedule. I think it's all about squad depth, and also the ability to kind of also be fortunate at times when things are getting rough. And COVID situation aside, I think what Leeds showed from their first year was kind of adding a few little pieces of depth, and for example, key players like Ben White playing a big part of their season. And that's kind of, for me, the change as well. And then also just a renewed sense of wanting to actually promote after getting so close from the players in the year beforehand. And I think that was a big impact for how Leeds were able to kind of actually finally succeed in terms of championship promotion. I will say, of course, when it comes to the Premier League, you have to look at the amount of games possible this year. There's not actually as many games in the championship. So I think that narrative, even if it is true, and you could argue that to an extent, because obviously in their first season, yes, the form dropped off, but the Premier League has much less games. They're involved in a much less tricky run of schedule. They have much more depth than they had in the previous year, and you can see the new signings like Rafinha and Rodrigo doing really well. So I think for me, it's about the club hierarchy has to kind of wait for the benefits of being commercially in the Premier League to come in, and to continue backing Bielsa, because we can see the results are flowing through. I mean, when you can beat a side like West Brom 5-0 that easily, I think it just shows a testament to what this club can be, and what this club can be, more often than not. Because right now, Leeds are almost the ultimate kind of like good bad side, where it's like they've conceded as much as they've scored, and it's so interesting to watch them play. But I think a Gary Lineker quote kind of sums them really well, where teams like to play them just as much as Leeds like to. I mean, people or fans like to watch Leeds.
No, you're right. And I think that you couldn't have summed it up better. And I think the best part about this team is that the fact that they've taken players that some would say are championship level or maybe not, and make them perform in the Premier League at a level that's probably better or at the same as so many of the top sides. And I think that's the testament to Bielsa here, that he's able to take each individual, put into his system, and he brings out the best of them. Yes, some players, just if they don't fit in that system, unfortunately will never get the chance, or will. But if you are a player who can play in that system, if you are a person who will believe in his ideology, he will get the best out of you. And one of the perfect examples of that is Patrick Bamford, a player you wouldn't say necessarily who's a clinical of strikers, or someone who's the best, most technical striker, but he's shown in the championship and now this year in the Premier League that he gets in those right positions. He works with the team. He understands the system well. The system creates chances for him, creates chances for the others, and he is getting rewarded for being patient and following that step by step. And I think that's just another example of why Bielsa is so great. And I think Leeds should and need to like understand, follow his ideology, follow his system, get him, like you mentioned, the depth for the positions that he needs, not players necessarily that are like who have the tag around him or the name around them, but the players that he wants for his positions are very, very key. And Rafinha and Rodrigo are showing that even with a bit more money spent, they're still fitting in the system well. So if they can back him in that side, and they can continue to put faith in him, I think Leeds could really surprise people in the next few years.
Absolutely. I think, when we talk about Leeds, another club that obviously benefited from kind of investing in the philosophy of the manager was Liverpool. And, they were so duly rewarded after a long absence in terms of being able to win the English Premiership after their kind of dominance in the 80s. And it was all kind of down to, I'd say, the investment from FSG into kind of Klopp's hierarchy in terms of how he sees specific assets of players and skill sets, and can kind of develop them so quickly, and put them in positions to shine. And overall, underpinning this is just a clear structure of play where you have, let's say, Firmino dropping deep, and then you have these two world-class wingers at your disposal who bring physical assets, technical assets that are clearly world-class. And then, I mean, of course, later on, what he invested in after Coutinho left was these kind of rocks in terms of Alisson and Van Dijk, who were able to strengthen the defense and also kind of provide the support needed for the fullbacks to continue shining. And it all culminated in that kind of insane season for Liverpool, I think, starting that 1920 with a 23-1-1 record and just blowing away opposition, in so many different ways. Because, when we saw them come into the league and we saw Salah break that kind of Premier League goal scoring record, a lot of the goals were through these two wingers. And we've seen them kind of adapt as a side. We've seen Henderson grow as a player. His ability to effectuate other areas of the pitch really shows for me like what Klopp imparts on a player who kind of wants to learn and wants to grow with him. Because I think his footballing mind is so open and wide that any player who really is willing to kind of put their boots down and work under him can just grow, provided the talent is there. And that's what Klopp provides to you.
And that's what it is, right? Like, in the fact that he brings this sort of winning mentality, that never to give up. Like, we've seen Liverpool side, they can go down a goal, but it never looks like their phase. They look like a team that's just willing to, like, okay, you scored a goal, that's fine, we'll score more. And this elite mentality of being able to just constantly put the pressure. And I feel like that Champions League win the year before was enough to sort of like settle, like making sure that yes, we are the elite team that we are playing like, in the one that we believe to be. And I feel like then when they went into the run of the Premier League, they were able to just breeze past so many teams. And I feel like you mentioned, I think it's the spine was so crucial for this Liverpool side to really be able to stamp their authority in the league with Fabinho and Van Dijk and Alisson. When you have these sort of rocks in your defensive spine, you're able to just sort of free up the players around them. The midfielders, I mean, Henderson gives you everything, right? But then you also have the likes of Wijnaldum, who's got the license to go a bit forward. And then in the defense, like a young Gomez could learn and be a bit more relaxed because he knows he has the leader in Van Dijk next to him. And in Allison, even if everything goes, flips upside down, you have a goalkeeper who's able to save you in those situations where sometimes it's just not possible. And I think having all of those things, those pieces together, putting this puzzle that they've been forming over several years. They've given Klopp the time, like we mentioned, like they've given him the time to make this team, to make it in his form. But at the same time, I feel like FSG, the club has done so well in providing him the pieces that he needed. So they didn't look at, like, let's say if there was a big player available of a big name, they looked at what he wanted and see what they could do well. And Coutinho, a wonderful player, but they realized also an opportunity to make the money to use that in places they might need more, and they did. And I feel like that's just incredible how this club has been run. They've done so well again this season. They're in the top of the league. But the Man United is very close to them, and it's a lot more tougher this year. But I think that the fact that Klopp has really shown the shine, that he's stepped in, he's made that he's competing against a Pep side that has also sort of dominated the league for a while, is just tells you more about him as a manager.
No, absolutely. And I think like when we think about German managers who've grown clubs, from one point to another and kind of leveled up their stature in the game, I think you have to say the same can be said about Nagelsmann in terms of his work in Leipzig, especially bringing in a lot of the talent from the Red Bull kind of development system and pushing them through, success after he moved on from Hoffenheim. And he's now done a wonderful job, of course, in the 1920 season, making it all the way into the semifinals. The Champions League this year, they also managed to still edge out, Man United and PSG, and kind of make it first in their group as well, in a very tough group. So I think the story so far hasn't ended for Leipzig, but ultimately they were able to kind of once again find that success with a very good finishing position last year, fourth in the Bundesliga. But I think, of course, the big achievement, of course, is that Champions League semi-final kind of positioning.
You're right. I mean, they've done so well in the league. We saw them again this year in the Champions League. They gave a great game against Manchester United. But at the same time, they can sometimes be suspect with their own success. It's just the recruitment, the testament to the club, the way they run. They've figured out a system. They know what they need to do to build. And in this manager, someone who plays a football that you would say is expansive, understands the pressing of it all, where at the same keeping that control in team and dominating and over, or just maybe over exerting on another team is just so intense that I feel like a lot of teams can play, even if the fact that they necessarily don't have the top players by name on paper. They have like the Leeds thing, they have a system place that is able to get the best out of each of those players. And I think that's where Nagelsmann is so good, is that he gets the best out of each player that he's got in his system. He's made Nkunku, who moved from PSG, look sublime. Danny Olmo has made some great strides under him after moving in from Ukraine, and we saw Timo Werner, an excellent player who's moved on to Chelsea. And they don't look like a team that they're missing players. They just seem to be finding the right replacements and continuing that system and that belief. And I think Nagelsmann has showed that he is definitely a coach who will move on to bigger clubs in the future and will be able to set his dominance and his tactical plans there. And it will be very exciting to see how his career progresses.
So, and I think just to round things off with Leipzig, I have to say that kind of crowning achievement was probably that win versus Diego Simeone, another I think top tier manager in the game. And I think the way you saw that is Atleti play a very static style. They stick to the formation, but they find kind of moments in time in terms of after they manage a game very well to kind of break through. And for me, the way he set up the game to kind of play that dynamic structure, that 4-3-3, with Angelino sometimes kind of pushing up as a left wing, really split Atletico Madrid apart. And it was only until João Felix came in and performed so individually well that we saw maybe Red Bull start to struggle a little bit more defensively. But that for me was the kind of big game where I thought, Atletico Madrid have a history of kind of dealing with very well high pressing teams in La Liga. And what Red Bull, of course, bring is just that kind of dynamic in terms of like adding a few kind of tinkerings in terms of adjusting player positions, and also kind of maximizing on players who have kind of assets outside of just pure pressing and kind of like physical feat. So, for example, like the ability to kind of use Sabitzer in a role where you make the most out of his physicality, and then his also ability to kind of use his range in terms of goal scoring, and then also kind of chance creation. And yeah, I mean, also using Upamecano as well, sometimes as an extremely advanced ball playing defender, even playing almost like as a libero. Like it's interesting to see what a manager can do when he has a backing. Of course, we still have to contextualize in Red Bull is a bit different to most of the Bundesliga clubs in the sense that they are under a big corporate infrastructure. So I think I understandably they're not exactly the most favored club in Germany, but it's 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 hard not to say that Nagelsmann is one of the kind of best managers in the world and most upcoming. And for many clubs who will be looking for managers in the future, of course, such an interesting option. But as we round up 1920, we move on to the 2021 season. We've only had a little bit of it so far, but I think we've already had several kind of wonderful stories across different divisions and leagues over Europe. I think the first one noticeably would be, the Aston Villa story with, as well as the kind of rise of Grealish in terms of prominence as a top player in the Premier League, and then also just Dean Smith's ability to kind of shift, from that kind of post-lockdown period, really kind of digging down on Aston Villa's defense, improving the defensive core and structure, and then also adding on this kind of these signings in terms of Emi Martinez and Matty Cash to really strengthen that defense. And we've seen it where in games, even if Mings is out or Konsa is out, that Aston Villa have managed to keep clean sheets. They look like one of the most defensively solid teams in the Premier League. And it hasn't changed when they played big teams like Chelsea or Liverpool.
No, you're right. And I think most of the times the teams that have been threatened with relegation, they kind of crumble in the pressure in the summer because a lot of teams look at their best players, they want to come and buy them. They were they were able to give Jack Grealish another contract, keep him down, tie him down. He is your star man. And I think that's what Dean Smith and the club did so well. They told the guy, listen, we have a plan for how to develop this team and to move it forward. Because I don't think Grealish would have stayed if there wasn't a plan in play. First season back is very difficult. There are a lot of it's just in different pace than the championship, different style, the pressure. There's a lot of factors to it. But like the fact that they were able to survive, dig in deep, and just get past relegation. I don't think a lot of people were expecting the sort of the step up that they would take in the summer. But I think that's incredible from the manager and the ownership of the club, knowing that this is where they want to go. They went in and got a goalkeeper who's been in sublime form for Arsenal the tail end of the season in Emi Martinez. Now they got him for 20 million. It's a fantastic buy. Someone who's going to be there for the next few years, gives you that Premier League experience to an extent, and at the same time, who's come from a club where you could probably say he's been exposed to some European football and stuff. As well as that, they went and added players like Ollie Watkins, top scorer in the championship. We've got Matty Cash, as you mentioned, the right back from the championship. This is something we'll talk about later as well. It's just the fact that they built on a system that they had. They added players, the right players that they needed. They profiled them well. They added them. Barkley as a loan was incredible. I feel like, unfortunately, we haven't been able to see too much of him since he got injured, but he showed that he brought out the best of Grealish too. And I think having players that you need and then focusing that team around your star man in Grealish. He's a player who's able to play in multiple positions, but at the same time, he's a leader. He's able to pick up the team with his performance and his sort of level of commitment that the rest of them start looking good. And if you once start now playing in a bit more front foot way, you get to see him perform better because now he gets in those pocket spaces. He's got more time because his front line will press a bit more. He gives a bit more time, and we're seeing now the quality that he possesses, and that's why he's being linked with so many big teams. I don't even think they can afford him because his price tag will be out of the roof. It's just he showed he's one of the best players in the league this season for me. He's made a step up into the English national team as well, and that's just how Aston Villa has done so well this season. And I think it's definitely a story we had to talk about.
No, absolutely. I think, as you mentioned with the midfield too, I think I want to give a big shout out to like John McGinn. He's been such a good player. I think underpinning that kind of relegation story was the fact that he was injured that whole time, and he is also another massive figure in terms of his physical work rate. You saw his duels with Conte as well in the recent Chelsea game, and it shows how much he brings to that team in terms of how much ground he covers, and then also his ability to be box to box as well with that near miss. And that's the thing for me. They've bought a lot of physical, dynamic players who can play off of Grealish, and those physical attributes really encapsulate the best for me in this team. Because when, for example, Grealish is able to move dynamically across the field, you have a traditional centre forward like Ollie Watkins, who sometimes likes to drift wide, and that really supports when Grealish maybe wants to cut inside and bring the ball deeper into the center. And spatially, the gaps are filled by these Aston Villa personnel who understand the role that they have to play and play perfectly around it. And I think, when it comes down to managers consolidating the position and improving on it the previous year, I think we have to give a massive shout out to what Gerrard has done with Rangers as well in the Scottish Premiership. I mean, their run of form, I think, is unprecedented. I think they might still be the only undefeated team in Europe potentially. But overall, I mean, you can see the success of what Gerrard has brought in terms of being able to use the most out of some key players who have been kind of labeled as problem childs or players who don't have a role to play. With Defoe kind of still playing a key role in that team. Tavernier, obviously, like having a miraculous season in the context of his career, where he's, I mean, way above goals and assists per game, way above goals and assists per game, even though he takes set pieces. And then also, still being able to use like Morelos, for example, trying to keep his kind of disciplinary record down while they kind of get results, utilizing more, I think, dynamic young threats such as like Haggis, and also, for example, Ryan Kent as an example. And yeah, overall, I think it shows what a great manager can do, when they maybe don't embark immediately into the championship or are thrown into the Premier League. It kind of reminds me of when Brendan Rodgers did so well with Celtic and was able to kind of remake his name around football and what allowed him to kind of land that Leicester City job, because of the ability to kind of imprint their philosophy in a league where, for example, there isn't necessarily that much spending, and you can actually consolidate on the players you want, and then also create this kind of philosophy and let it flow through into results eventually like this.
No, you're right, and I think you hit a nail there, Fran. With the manager being able to, develop his own game and his philosophy, and I think that sometimes a younger manager with maybe a high-profile name needs to have. I think Lampard got a bit of that at Derby. He was able to just test out, test the water. You can see with Aston Villa and Derby, Rooney and um, John Terry are sort of getting their chances. They're learning their trade. Gerrard moving to Rangers, a lot of people would have been like, oh, maybe you should try the championship. Rangers is a big club, and we've known that they haven't been able to win the league for quite a few seasons. Celtic has been able to dominate the Scottish league. That was a big task in hand, while at the same time, learning your own trade. To be able to now be like, with at top of the table with 2 games in hand, this season could be the one where they're finally going on to win the league. He's done that in a convincing style, conceding less than 6 goals this season in the league, which is incredible. At the same time, being playing that philosophy that he wants to play, he's trying out, he's testing stuff. His man management, like you mentioned, like the players with the red card issues and disciplinary problems, he's able to make them calm. He's made them a better performance. I think that's important because once you move on to those bigger clubs, you're gonna find personalities in the dressing room that are hard to deal with. People who are spoiled, people who are like superstars, and they have different. And it's just when you build your way up, you understand how each different player needs a different sort of treatment. Like Sir Alex Ferguson is the king of man management for me. He was able to manage any kind of personality needed. And ones that didn't work for him, he was able to also get rid of them if he needed to. He was the man. He was set himself as the thing. And I think Gerard is doing really well there. Is that he is the key man there. He is the leader, and people around him are being dealt with the way he thinks is the best way. And we're seeing that with Rangers this season. And you know, this is what he needs to do. He needs to win the league this season. If he can continue that next season, establish himself, then he's there. Okay, you know what? I've learned and I've made my philosophy. He's able to make a step up to another bigger club. Personally, I wouldn't say that he should move to Liverpool just yet because that job, whoever takes the job after Klopp, will be so difficult because of the expectations, because of the level that Klopp has brought. I feel like maybe the one after that might be great for Gerrard because he is able to sort of be in the industry for at least a few more years, have gained experience, probably gained a few more silverware, and then obviously, as we know, his end goal is always going to be to go to Liverpool. He is a Liverpool man through and through, and to see him possibly get there at the end and seeing these bright spots, like we see that he is a good manager, is I think Liverpool fans will be really excited for whatever he holds in the future.
Absolutely. I think AC Milan has been such a wonderful story too in the world of football, where you've seen like a historic club rise back to greatness, very similar to Rangers, right? So Rangers were struggling for so long, had gone up and down in terms of the kind of Scottish hierarchy, and we've seen that to a lesser extent with AC Milan, a club that really reached the pinnacle of European success, under coaches like Ancelotti and was just star-studded players all around. And we've seen a massive fall from grace in recent years from AC Milan up until really, I think Pioli turned the tides when he was hired as almost an emergency kind of signing after Gattuso had left the club, right? And I think the crazy thing for me is that he's managed this kind of mismatch of players and created it into like a stable kind of foundation in his 4-3-3 structure, right? And it's so interesting for me to see that they've managed to pull in young talents such as Teo Hernandez, and then also bring in like veterinary talent such as Ibrahimovic, who's now really, for me, extending his legacy with all he's doing this season. And they were so hot in form post lockdown as well, and they've continued it already in this kind of early on in the season where we've seen Juventus and Inter Milan drop points. And I think it's such a perfect story for Pioli because he was so close to also being fired. Ragnick was also kind of rumored to come in, and that deal had to be shut down at the last minute because they were doing so well with Pioli. And players like Simon Kjaer as well, the centre back pairing alongside Romagnoli has done so well, and he was also rumored to be kind of a signing that, for example, Rangnick didn't want. And it's just for me, yeah, Pioli's ability to kind of pull in these young players such as Rafael Leao, use Kessie, use Tonali as well, especially since Benacer is now injured. and really create like a stable foundation where you have veteran players, and then also a winning mentality that's been instilled from this kind of top-down approach with Ibrahimovic, being a leadership figure for this team.
No, you're right, and I mean, like, I think Ivan Gazidis gets a bit of credit there. He's able to manage this club, who's we've seen in years they've bought players that necessarily weren't, worthy of playing for AC Milan. The bit of high wages, it's been a bit of a mess. He's come in, he's sort of settled the ship. Even right, like you mentioned, it seems like an unbalanced club, but they seem with one or two signings, right, like getting the Theo Hernandez and Zlatan Ibrahimovic back, who probably a lot of people would have looked at like, oh, he's coming back from LA, he's 38 years old, what's he gonna do? That mentality, that sort of just him taking care of his body, his physical levels are still incredible, and showing all of that, putting it together, I think they are now starting to set up those foundations, as you mentioned, they go on. I mean, like you mentioned before, Celtic, Rangers being the other unbeaten team, AC Milan still in the top five leagues are the only team that haven't lost a game.
Yeah.
It's incredible, and it's no fluke as well. As much as everyone keeps thinking, like, is this? No, like you mentioned, they have been building this from the post lockdown. They're forming a structure. I think they've been quietly working on what they can do, and they're competing with it. You can say maybe also it helps the fact that like the likes of Juventus have sort of regressed compared to the years, but that's no credit. That's not anything to say that AC Milan haven't put in the effort and the time and put in the pieces in play that needed them to be in the situation they are. Something they will definitely be looking to win the league this year after many years. And Zlatan, an expert in winning league titles, is the best leader they could have in that team. Someone with the experience who knows what it takes to perform over 30 games, 38 games, and to keep that team in. Like, because you need to focus. You can't lose concentration midway. In the end, it's a marathon. It's not like a league. It's like a cup tournament. This requires a lot of determination and belief, and constantly performing at those levels at a high level. And I think this AC Milan team has a lot of overperforming people. Some people we might say that are not necessarily the quality, but they are showing that they are there. They're going to perform. And that's what, and with some young talents like they bought with Tonali and Rafael Loeo is performing really well. That's just a good foundation. You got the right mix of old and young, and that will lead to hopefully a successful season for them. And it'll be something definitely we have to keep an eye out.
No, absolutely. I think just to round things off in terms of 2021, in terms of surprises for me, I think it has to be Everton. You look at Carlo Ancelotti, a historic manager of the game. Some would have thought has not been as successful as of late after his Real Madrid tenure ended. But he's done so well in Everton, and you can see it with the managerial statistics as well. I think he has perhaps the third highest win rate as well in terms of active managers in the Premier League. And it shows a lot because Everton is not in the last 10 years at least a club that is associated with kind of a top four finish, or even sniffing that kind of category in terms of getting close to European football. And for me this season, I think he's already shown incredible kind of ability to be pragmatic as a manager and to find constantly a winning solution from game to game. And we saw early on the season, I mean, the pull of a manager when James Rodriguez came in, he was in splintering form. I think you saw Digne and Coleman really play their absolute best when they had options to play off of. And we've seen Dominic Calvert-Lewin's rise, of course, a crazy player who's continuously developing game on game. We covered him almost weekly on the channel. But what's wonderful is that for me, he's shown this ability to adapt when they have injuries and when they have unfortunate suspensions as well. So we've seen situations where if Richarlison's out or if Digne's out due to injury, he's managed to adapt and also bring in the key players. So, for example, Godfrey, once again, a late signing in the summer, and he's playing such a massive role now game on game, whereas you wouldn't have said that he would have found a way to kind of sniff that kind of starting XI, when they were actually in that hot run of form at the start of the league. And he's adapted formations. We've seen him swap from a 4-3-3 to a 4-4-2 to even three at the back formations. And he's even also managed to bring, the best out of players who we'd say perhaps were not going to perform very well in the Premier League, such as Iwobi and Sigurdsson. They've in a sense fallen off the pedestal of their kind of peak years, maybe, for example. And for me, when I've seen that when James has been out, Sigurdsson has stepped up massively in the structure, and he's also been able to use Iwobi perfectly as a winger and also as a wing back. And it's crazy to see Everton kind of up there and maintain their status. But it's not surprising when you think about the man behind the scenes.
You're right. This man has won several champion leagues. He's won leagues all over the world. Maybe that's what the club like Everton needed. They needed maybe a manager who's done it before. You know, like Tottenham are trying that out with Mourinho. Some could say it looked like really successful in the start of the season. They've little dropped down in performances, but like maybe that's what they needed a little bit. Someone who's done it before, someone's been there, who knows what it means to be. And I feel like each and every one of those players aren't big enough, the ones who were already there, to like doubt Ancelotti's tactics or doubt Ancelotti's beliefs. Because when you're Iwobi or Sigurdsson, who's looking to sort of get their career back going, to get in those starting lineups, and you've got a manager like Ancelotti there who says, you know what, listen, play for me, play in these positions. You're gonna put in your 100%. You're gonna give in everything that you got, and I think that's what it is, right? Like you mentioned, they adapted so well. Whatever the issue, a lot of teams can complain that they lost their star man in James, let's say, or they're losing both their fullbacks who were like sublime. They've been so well, Digne and Coleman, and to still be able to perform and to keep themselves relevant in the race for European football is an excellent statement from Ancelotti, and I think Liverpool, Everton side, as well. At the same time, they're now being linked with several players that you would never in the years before think that would come to Everton. And I think that sort of pulling power Ancelotti brings with you is key for like sometimes making maybe that big step, sometimes bringing that superstar in that can really take you to the next level. And I think Everton have wowed a lot of people. I've really loved Michael Keane's performance as center back. He's sort of marshaled himself with Mina, and he's like sort of gives the the sort of level of relaxation that you'd want from your fullbacks. He kind of makes them calm them down. He's able to control his back line, play the passes out to Calvert-Lewin, Calvert-Lewin being excellent, as you mentioned. He's able to just control that heart of the midfield, show that he's a good leader, something that maybe Everton have sort of missed in that team as well, for me personally. And there are still a few more positions that he can look at, but this is what it is, right? Like you've got now a project, and slowly can build in time. There's no pressure here. There's no speed required. He's building at his time, at his pace, and I think the Merseyside fans will be really happy that they're able to get this manager on ship and on board, and they'll be looking forward to hopefully more successful years. Something Everton fans would hope that they deserve.